But why do people hear their names being called in the woods? Oh, yes, indeed. Spooky stuff, right? Ghost stories, all kinds of things. Bigfoot comes to mind. Nature spirits, the fae folk, this type of stuff. I once I saw the headline, I was like, that's it. That's what we're doing. That's too cool, and that's too amazing, because we are kind of coming into that season, shaking off the winter doldrums and putting on our shorts and getting ready. At least we are here in Vegas. Sorry if you're out there wrapped up in a jacket somewhere, freezing next to a heater. Well, it's spring in Vegas, and it's spring in the Southwest, and people are already camping, which is absolutely wild if you live in the Northeast or something. I don't know. Anyway, so just straight from this article, and that's the question for the night. We'll start with this, and of course it's going to go into layers and branches and turn into all kinds of wild things. But why do people hear their names being called in the woods? The whisper, the whisper. Check it out. So you're walking through the woods with no one else around when you hear it. Faintly, from the background hum of the forest, impossibly hair-raisingly, comes the sound of someone calling your name. Could it be a ghost? Bigfoot? Some elaborate practical joke by a prank TV show? It's likely none of those. So why do people sometimes hear their names or other words being called when no one is actually saying anything? And is it ever something to worry about? Ooh, things get spooky, right? So the phenomenon of hearing intelligible voices or noises in meaningless background noise is known as auditory pareidolia. Back to pareidolia. We talked about pareidolia in the very, first, second, third Troubled Mind show, and it seems like it sticks. It seems like it definitely sticks, doesn't it? Pareidolia. This one's auditory pareidolia. So the sources of this noise vary, according to livescience.com. Link's going to be in the description down below if you want to read this in full. And so let's see. The sources of this noise vary. They may include electric fans, running water, airplane engines, the hums of washing machines, or white noise machines. Oh, I see. According to audiologists, it is an auditory subtype of pareidolia in which people see faces or other meaningful patterns in ambiguous images. Okay, all right, that's fine. Okay, but what if it's not? As usual, here we go, right? There's the scientific stuff says pareidolia, Mike. People see faces in the clouds. Mike, do you think there's really people in the clouds, Mike? Well, in what context? Please elaborate on that question. And that's where we get weird and get wild on this, because there's a lot to this. There's probably a lot of ghost stories begin in this, at least in this space of, deep in the forest and what do they call it? Goose flesh. I always hated that term because it sounds disgusting. But the prickles in your skin as you start to feel an odd sensation, and then you hear a voice. You hear a whisper. You hear somebody speaking to you that's not there. Clearly they're not there, because otherwise you wouldn't be shocked or surprised by it. But in some cases, even so, they call your name. Now, why? And a few things come to mind, and as we start, and you're going to see how weird we get. Remember this specifically, that calling the name of a spirit supposedly gives one power over said spirit, which is why they guard their names very closely, the names of demons, things like this, and even obfuscate their names and change their sometimes very long and difficult to pronounce, right? Things like this. And so, isn't it strange that, flip this on its head, Rumpelstiltskin style, in the forest seems to be calling your name as if to control you, as if the forest is compelling you to go deeper, to explore further, to go further away from the camp itself. I don't know. A lot of ways to look at this, a lot of ways that kind of get spooky almost right off the bat here. But basically, that's where we start tonight. And the question is, of course, why do people hear their names being called in the woods? A lot of wild ideas. And another thing came to mind as I was putting the show together and thinking about the idea is Slender Man. And again, that is a modern folklore of the internet, the Wikipasta. Again, we are familiar with the story of the tragic story of the two young girls who were trying to impress Slender Man in the forest. Slenderman, I've heard it said both ways. And this entity, this forest entity, is tall and in a black and white sort of tuxedo-style suit with multiple tentacles or arms, and always watching children from deep in the forest, okay? But they say that as part of the Slender Man actual mythology or the folklore from the stories that began on the internet, that he whispers. He whispers from the depths of the forest to draw you in. And of course, as I said there, that tragic story of the two girls who lured their friend out into the forest, stabbed her dozens of times, and trying to give her as a sacrifice to Slenderman so that they could join his, mansion in the forest or something to this effect, right? Clearly and obviously a massive psychosis happening, and clearly and obviously not a real spirit. Or is it? And this becomes where this gets incredibly weird, because this goes back to all kinds of things, including, of course, not just spirits and, the tales of old and where the ghost stories begin deep in the forest, as I said, but also it starts to look at things like the Gaia hypothesis and those primordial nature spirits I'm always so fond of talking about as, well, because we can't really define them yet in terms of the mycelium network, in terms of all manner of just weirdness, okay? Actual weirdness as we kind of get into this. But anyway, so that's the question tonight. That's where we begin. Speaking specifically about why do people hear their names being called in the woods? And what are your theories? So I'm calling this tonight, of course, the Whispering Woods and a Haunting Hypothesis. Do I have a direct hypothesis? No, not really. But I do think that there's several good ones that are probably worthwhile, and there's probably several other good ones that I've never even considered that maybe you guys can bring to the conversation. If you want to talk about this tonight and consider what may be possible here, love to hear your thoughts. 702-957-1037. You can click the Discord link at troubledminds.org. We'll put you on the show. One moment, though. We're going to take a quick break and get a word from our sponsor, which is Jack in Oregon. One moment. Be right back. And looks like James has jumped in early, so we'll talk to James here momentarily. I figured he'd be here with bells on with the the haunting hypothesis going down. Now, this is one of those ones that's everybody knows. Everybody's had this sensation, and whether you heard the actual whisper of your own name is, well, let's say debatable, because when we're talking about sort of the ethereal, auditory spirit realm, whatever that means, I think things aren't quite as direct as they seem sometimes, including, of course, EVPs. You've seen some of this with the ghost hunting and things like that. And, when they catch something, they'll play it back and they'll be like, did you hear that? And it's all, and then they play it back and you're like, no, I didn't hear it. And they're like, did you hear that? It said, the gorilla jumped. And then it goes, no, the gorilla jumped. You're like, oh, no, I hear it. Oh, my God. Right? This type of stuff. And so clearly there is some pareidolia aspects to, the white noise effect. We've talked about that with, other things. But in this sense, it is, sort of that latent hum or hiss of the forest, again, the wilderness doing its thing, kind of that just how do you describe it? If there's no like brook around, babbling brook or something, the forest still makes a sound. Like you can still kind of close your eyes and meditate and still hear things happening around you. It feels like it's alive. It feels like every bit of it is alive, including the ground. So the mycelium network and the rest, right? But I'm just saying that there seems to be something here, and there's a lot of ways to look at this, and I got a lot of theories. Hope you do as well. What's up? I hear bagpipe music and the white noise. Damn it, Matzell. Love to hear your thoughts on this. Let's go straight to James, because he jumped in here early because I figured he'd be part of this, wanted to be part of this. Talking to Whispering Woods tonight, a haunting hypothesis. James Salcido, the paranormal expert of Troubled Minds. What's up, my man? How you doing tonight? What's on your mind?
I'm okay. Can you hear me?
Yep, loud and clear.
Good. I was tempted to whisper, but then I thought that might not be the best for an audio show. So,
I'll do it, James.
I was tempted to whisper. Yeah, I was tempted to whisper your name and play around a little bit, but no. The woods in general. There's just so much that goes on in them. I think part of the pareidolia aspect is just the way that any kind of a breeze, not even mentioning a huge wind, just a breeze can make plants and trees and different parts of trees and everything move around. And then they may be bumping into other things and each other. And so there's that. I mean, obviously there's all different kinds of creatures that are in there making different kinds of noises. So I can definitely understand the pareidolia aspect from all that. So it wouldn't surprise me if that does happen sometimes.
Yeah, well, it definitely is part of life. I mean, clearly, every weird sound we hear isn't some spook from the other side. You know what I mean? And I don't mean like the CIA spooks. I mean like an actual spook inspector, Ghostbuster style. So clearly, there's going to be some of that sort of misidentification of these sounds and things. And again, even visual aspects, the humans as being the pattern recognition expert that I'm always talking about. But with sounds, it's a little bit different because then we kind of broach into the realm of language itself. And for instance, let's say we're in the forest, James. We're just kicking it. We're just, I don't know, doing whatever, hanging out, and going to go roast some marshmallows when the sun goes down, and we're just enjoying the forest, right? But then you start to hear these whispers, okay? And the deal is that let's say if they're in a different language, let's say it's not necessarily a foreign forest, but let's say, let's go paranormal for a moment and say that it's maybe a latent residual haunting in the forest itself from a native tribe that's been there for God knows how many thousands of years before and have come and gone and have long been forgotten. So the language aspect becomes maybe the things that we hear in that space may not be anything close to English whatsoever. And so you see how the communication aspect starts to become incredibly weird because you don't really know what you're hearing, even if it sounds, let's say, sounds compelling that it might be a voice or something to that effect. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, I had an experience once in the woods. Although I was in a cabin, and it was at night, of course, and everyone else was asleep except for me because night owl. And I was at a summer camp, obviously, just summertime and everything, kids, all that. And I started hearing this. I couldn't understand it. It sounded like a group of people, perfectly in time, doing some kind of a chanting, shouting kind of a thing out in the woods, which really surprised me because if you're running a camp and you've got all kinds of kids, are you really going to do that way late at night and risk waking everybody up and freaking everybody out? I mean, unless you're going to play some kind of huge joke on the whole place. Um, but so I heard this, and it was coming from the direction of one of the fire pits, of course. And it just went on for a few minutes, and it built and built until it just went to one louder shout, and then it stopped, and then there was nothing, and I could not understand what was being said, and I didn't recognize any of the voices,
That's creepy.
and I still don't know what happened that night. Yeah,
It was a
that was
time.
when I was a kid.
It was a time slip, James, and it was clearly and obviously a pagan celebration from hundreds of years ago that you were experiencing in the modern time.
I was just waiting for some other kid there to be to like react somehow, but no one did. Of course, it would just be me, but yeah.
Of course, of course. I mean, the paranormal expert of troubled minds, what you'd expect, right? And so that becomes a thing too. So a lot of ways to consider this. Again, the residual haunting aspect of of an ancient civilization long gone. It does really resonate here because you don't know, like I said, language wise, it does. Would you communicate, for instance, if you were Sumerian or something? And you were you were over there in the area, ancient Sumeria, and a ghost, a latent energy, resonant energy from thousands of years ago tried to communicate with you. I don't think it'd be in English. You know what I'm saying? So I think that becomes the weirdness of this and sort of the weirdness of EVPs in general. But of course, this isn't EVPs per se. This is actual auditory something we're picking up, that's actually happening, and it is sort of that white noise phenomenon, which is creepy. It's a creepy aspect of this. But yeah, amazing stuff. What else you got regarding that latent to hauntings or whatever? Take it wherever you like. As you know, I got some wild ideas as we get going. Of course, trickster spirits. We're going to get into not just that. Well, I'll put it in my back pocket and save it for a little bit later. Not blow all the good stuff right up front. But what else you got regarding any of that? The ideas here and the whispering in the woods. It doesn't seem to be a coincidence, does it?
No, I mean people have been living and coming and going from forests and the woods for, I mean, probably since they were first near them. I mean, so who knows how many hundreds, thousands of years now. And I do think, like you said, and like I always say, with all kind of high strangeness, there are so many possibilities there. Um, and so I won't blow all of them right now, but uh, I've found these things happen up until like today, where people will hear things in the woods. I had one, excuse me, recently where on one of my shows where this this couple was in the woods. The wife was in the woods reading a book, and the husband was on this stream fishing a little ways away. And the woman started hearing another woman humming, and just it was moving through the woods. And of course, there was no other sounds of movement through the woods. And this witness did not see anything moving through the woods. And eventually, it freaked her out enough where she left, and luckily the husband was done around the same time with his fishing, and they got out of there. But he didn't hear anything when he was near the stream. But these things they still happen today.
Yeah, for sure. And this is again one of those tropes that kind of won't die. It's you find yourself out there deep in the forest, and you know what it brought to mind too when I was kind of just skimming through the article and thinking of ideas here is now that we're coming into camping season, it brought to mind that missing 411. We've talked about that a few times in the past. And just that the high strangeness that happens not just in the national parks but in deep wilderness areas of what the hell's really happening out there. And a lot of things kind of flow into that in terms of possibilities. And of course it could be, well, all manner of things. And I don't know, do you think it's related in some way, not just to James but everybody out there? And what is your theory here? Is it simply auditory pareidolia, as we're told? Extraterrestrials, Serena, maybe, with the joke laughing there. Yeah, I don't know. And that's exactly the point tonight. We're just kind of kicking around some ideas and talking about this. And I've got a bunch of them, including, of course, trickster archetypes and ultra-terrestrials, extraterrestrials. Why not? We'll kick that in. Lots of ideas here. But the bizarre thing is it is something that is resonant, at least as a trope, as one of those sort of, like I said, the beginning of a haunted ghost story. It's like, the most common trope is it was a dark and stormy night, right? That whole bit. But I mean, like a close second is, the sun was going down in the forest and you're turned around and you're not sure exactly how to get back to the car, right? This type of stuff. You've lost your sense of direction and the disorientation and the panic begins to kick in. And you start to hear the sounds escalating, echoing, even calling your name. And anyway, you get the idea. Like it's definitely one of those things that is a little bit terrifying because it's almost like not quite like being lost in the ocean. We've talked about that recently, but kind of that same terror of disorientation in a space that's hostile, dare we say, alien in some ways. Of course, it's terrestrial, but there are predators there as the sun goes down. I mean, it's definitely one of those things. We talked about the wolf show as well. That whole bit of the pack hunters kind of looking to find dinner that night. All that stuff plays. But so it is one of those tropes that's definitely resonant in not just horror fiction, but in movies and all the rest of the stuff. And I think there's probably a reason for that. There's like a primordial terror as part of it, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, definitely. There's so many things in nature I wouldn't want to encounter, and that's not even counting anything unexplainable. Then again, I'm not much for being out in nature anyway. I'm weird like that. Um, but yeah, and so many of these accounts that I find, it always makes me wonder when people have weird experiences in the woods. Is that sort of the beginning of what could have ended up being a 411 event, but due to various factors, they were able to get out of there and not have that happen. And that's the really terrifying part of all that, I think.
Yeah, like what could happen, what the possibilities of if it goes bad. And look, and the thing too is clearly, if you're going to be doing some weird stuff, like some weird, cults type stuff, rituals in the forest type thing, devil worshiping or things like this, right? Again, back to the 80s tropes of terrible things that happen in a dark forest on the weekends or whatever, But there's definitely that aspect of, people on the outskirts, the fringes of society, that maybe even groups, breakaway civilizations as we described them, kind of maybe moving into spaces where they, aren't easily found, and kind of can be transient in that nature, where they kind of pop up here, pop up there, and very Slender Man-esque, as sort of a haunting spirit sort of thing. But of course, we're talking about people, and isn't as we learned from Scooby-Doo, James, the bad guy and the monster and the ghost is typically always people. So maybe that tracks too.
Yeah. There's also all kinds of accounts of people finding either figurines or statues or different kinds of what appear to be altars. I mean, there's all kinds of weirdness that can go on out in the woods.
100%. So that's what's on my mind tonight. We're here with James Salcedo, the paranormal expert in Troubled Minds, and talking about why do people hear their names being called in the woods. So first off, the questions. That's the first one. Second, has this ever happened to you? Do you think it's more than just auditory pareidolia, as we're told? And if so, how wild and spooky does it get? And do you think this is somehow related to the phenomenon of the missing 411, where people tend to end up missing in these forest spaces in very spooky ways? Yeah, maybe not, somewhere in between. I don't really know. Of course, you know me. I'm not big on answers, but I am big on questions and ideas. So I'd love to hear your ideas on this. And how does this look, let's say, in the modern day? It's 2024, right? We're not scared of ghost stories. We ain't afraid of no ghost. Except, what happens when you hear your name whispered in the forest? Is that enough to change your mind? That becomes a question tonight. What do you think is happening? Do you think it is weird? Do you think it's, again, we could get into really weird stuff, super maybe juice concepts like we said, time slips, or maybe dimensional bleed over? What about your alternate selves trying to contact you in a moment, let's say, away from technology? Who knows what's really happening here? But I'd love to hear your thoughts.